Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 29th meeting of the Planning Board. We'll start with the update from the Community Development Department. Jeff, is that you?
I'm sorry, I didn't think it was, but I guess it is. Let me just do one thing quickly. I can probably do most of this by memory.
Go ahead.
Are you? Oh, I'm sorry. I can tell we're firing on all cylinders tonight. Hang on a second. Technical difficulties. So just a quick update. So we're having a public hearing tonight. It's on a zoning petition that will also be heard at the Ordinance Committee tomorrow down at City Hall at, I believe, 5:30 p.m. So that's this week. Next week at the Planning Board, we have our annual town gown reports. Those will be presentations from the four larger institutions of higher learning in the city: the Holt International School of Business, which is associated with EF, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also known as MIT, Lesley University, and Harvard University. The reports are available online for anybody that wants to review them, and I think we have some number of copies. On that same day, a little earlier in the afternoon, there's going to be hearings of the Ordinance Committee on two zoning petitions, both City Council zoning petitions, the flat roof zoning petition and the accessory apartment zoning petition. The Planning Board heard both of those last week. On February 12th, so that's in 2 weeks, there will be a design review of the building that's permitted at 325 Main Street. So this is the sort of continued discussion related to the MXD infill development concept plan, and that will be another joint meeting with the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority. And then the good news, February 19th, our meeting will be canceled. We're on that day, so there'll be a week off. And we don't have any additional hearings scheduled now, but I'm sure we will at some point in the future. I'm looking over to see if there's any other announcements that the department might want to make. Assuming there's none, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you. I just want to check. The town gown meeting is going to be in this location?
Yes, it will be in this room, and like all our meetings, it'll be video streamed and recorded.
Right. I know sometimes we've met in the senior center, so I just wanted to be clear for everybody that the meeting will take place in this location. Okay, thank you.
Yep, same time, same place.
Same place. Okay, are there any transcripts to be adopted? I'm sorry, October 2nd and 16th. And they've been reviewed and certified. Okay, I have a motion to accept those transcripts. Is there a second? All those in favor? Great, thank you. So now we have a hearing on a zoning petition by Joseph McGuire on behalf of Alexandra Real Estate Equities, Inc., to amend the zoning map of the City of Cambridge by creating a new overlay zoning district entitled Grand Junction Pathway Overlay District in the area of the existing Grand Junction Railroad right-of-way between Cambridge Street and Binney Street, and to amend Article 20.00 of the zoning ordinance by creating a Section 20.1000, a Grand Junction Pathway Overlay District. Mr. Rafferty, are you presenting? Yes, sir. Okay. I just wanted to make clear to the public that the purpose of this meeting is to see if the board can reach agreement on a recommendation to make to the City Council. It is the City Council that adopts any zoning changes, and there, as Jeff indicated, there'll be a hearing on this matter tomorrow before the Ordinance Committee of the City Council, and then it may ultimately go to the City Council for hearing and action. So our drill is simply to review the proposal and see if we can reach agreement on a recommendation to the City Council. Mr. Rafferty?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is James Rafferty. I'm an attorney with offices at 907 Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge. I'm appearing this evening on behalf of the petitioner, Alexandria Real Estate Equities. With me this evening is my co-counsel, Robert Fitzpatrick from Wilmer Hale, Joseph McGuire, Senior Vice President of Alexandria, his colleague Michelle Lauer, an Assistant Vice President at Alexandria, and the company co-president and regional director Thomas Andrews is present. As noted by the chair, this is a zoning petition that has been filed by Alexandria to create a new zoning overlay district, and that district is entitled the Grand Junction Overlay District. Its location appears, you can see it on the screen in front of you. It's a district that is comprised principally of land formerly known and used as the Metropolitan Pipe Supply Company. Alexandria acquired that land a little more than a year ago. Since the time of their acquisition, they have begun to explore manners in which the land can be repurposed. What is involved in this rezoning petition in its simplest form is a request that an amendment to the zoning ordinance be adopted that would create a special permit mechanism that would allow for increased height and density in that overlay district in exchange for the recognition of certain significant public improvements. And the most notable significant public improvement contained in the district is the creation of the Grand Junction Path Overlay District from Binney Street to Cambridge Street. The Grand Junction Overlay Path has been a long-standing public policy and open space objective of the City of Cambridge. Dating back to at least 2000 in the Green Ribbon Study Commission, it was identified as a highly desirable means of creating non-road transportation connecting portions of eastern Cambridge. As recently as August of 2017, the Kendall Square Multi-Mobility Task Force identified the Grand Junction as a key component of achieving the goals of the task force. Similarly, in recent rezonings, most recently both the Volpe rezoning and prior to that the PUD 5 rezoning, development rights were identified in exchange for commitments for the Grand Junction Path. Those commitments, we'll show you later, involve other locations of the Grand Junction, principally beyond, below Main Street, and they were MIT commitments set forth in a letter of commitment in both the Volpe rezoning and in the special permits granted under PUD 5. Tonight we're going to show you what the Grand Junction potential exists, but I suspect that's known to most of the planning board since it's been such a long-standing planning objective. But in addition to that, what we have set out to do is to try to create a development pattern here that would recognize what even the current zoning recognizes, is that the edge of this property on Binney Street has a different characteristic than it does when you go 300 feet or more down the street closer to the residential neighborhood. We have a model here this evening, and Mr. McGuire will walk you through the model, as will our project architect. But suffice it to say that one of the goals identified by Alexandria is how to create a development opportunity here that would support the type of financial commitment that is going to be needed to make this critical link in the Grand Junction pathway. I'd commend for your reading, and I'm sure you've already done so, but a very thorough analysis of the petition, the benefits of the Grand Junction, as well as the dimensional issues contained in the petition, is set forth in Mr. Roberts' memo. It's helpful in two ways, because the memo contains within it a designation of the existing zoning. In the existing zoning, board members may recall there was something created at the time of the ECAP zoning called the Echo District. So thinking back at the time of ECAPs, which I believe was 2005 or 2007, 2001, I'm being correct, okay. 2001? 2001, wow, so a few years ago. So, but even in the Echo rezoning, there's a different treatment for the Binney Street height than there is in the back of that. And there's an acknowledgement that the Binney Street height could, for residential, could go to 65 feet, and the balance of the site would remain at 45 feet, and then as you get into the residential district, 35 feet. The current zoning of the lot is the front portion of the lot, about the first 60% of the lot closest to Binney Street is zoned industrial A1. The balance of the lot is zoned residence C1. So Alexandria has been meeting with neighbors, interested stakeholders, community groups to discuss their plan and solicit input and feedback. Do we have what we thought we'd do tonight is just really take a minute to acclimate the board. Like most projects, everyone probably knows this corner, but until you get a chance to really see it, you get to appreciate its context. What you see there is the way the property looked up until a few months ago, because those light industrial buildings that had occupied the site for decades are no longer present. So the site has been those buildings. This is looking down Binney Street as you're approaching the tracks. The site is on your left. What's on the right, once you cross over the tracks, is a triangular portion of land which is commonly referred to as Pork Chop Park, but it's the land that the CRA has negotiated with Boston Properties, and you'll see in our presentation tonight, it's going to be a portion of the public space being developed in this section of Cambridge. So the building, as you'll see in our image tonight, really is going to be a key component of this open space, and it's designed to take its place in the context of the buildings that are already there, the commercial-style buildings. You'll see in the background in that photo the garage at 1 Kendall Square. Alexandria also owns 1 Kendall Square. This development will abut it, and many of the retail amenities in 1 Kendall Square will be particularly appealing to this location. What's proposed here is a lab building. Alexandria, as you know, is a developer of life science buildings. A little more than 10, 11 years ago, Alexandria engaged in a similar exercise that some of you participated in. They acquired a series of parcels along Binney Street, which were zoned for light industrial uses. And as a result of months and months of meetings and negotiations with city councilors, neighbors, planning board members, a public need was identified, a community use, which is now the 2.2-acre Rogers Street Park. The assemblage of those properties, the conveyance of the land to the city, the payment of $8 million for the construction of those parks and the design of those parks is a precedent that, frankly, Alexandria is looking to replicate in this zoning petition. They recognize the importance of demonstrating a commitment to a community effort, not a community benefit that Alexandria has decided is appropriate, but one that reflects the longstanding public policy objectives expressed by the city through its planning department and its political subdivisions. What you see here before you is an outline of the meetings that we've been having to discuss this in order to let the board understand we are very mindful of the reactions in the community. We know that the proposed height here at 120 feet represents a significant departure from the existing zoning, but we strongly believe that we'll be able to demonstrate that added density at the Binney Street edge of the site creates an acceptable trade-off in the rear of the site where the opportunities for open space and lower density are available. The way the parcel is currently configured, the balance of the site, once the footprint of the buildings are established, is not contemplated for development. We've identified that area as an opportunity that the city may be interested in exploring to create a public purpose. That's not set forth in the zoning, but we envision that land, its ultimate disposition, any improvements upon it, to be the source of discussions both in the community and at the ordinance committee with city councilors. In much the same way that other public improvements have occurred, we believe that a letter of commitment from Alexandria could result in the conveyance of that land, and we're talking land approximately an acre in size on that site. So those opportunities are also part of what we believe to be one of the benefits of allowing for the transfer of this density to the front portion of the site. Mr. McGuire will take you through our thinking. What you see here, and what Mr. McGuire will explain, is a proposed model where a building depicted there would be 120 feet in height. And we would like to suggest that this process that we're undertaking this evening will allow an opportunity for both the planning board and starting tomorrow evening, the ordinance committee, to really understand the context, what the proposed public benefits are here, and also to realize that the opportunity here to create this stretch of the Grand Junction pathway, as noted in Mr. Roberts' memo, probably advances the goals of the creation of this pathway by a significant amount of time. And the value of that is something that we believe is an area where Alexandria has a demonstrated capacity and ability to execute based on its experience creating the Rogers Street Park and the other community benefits that were included in the Binney Street rezoning. So right now we'd like Mr. McGuire to walk you through what's proposed on the site.
Good evening, I'm Joe McGuire. I live at 273rd Street in East Cambridge. I am a senior vice president at Alexandria Real Estate Equities. Just a refresher of who Alexandria Real Estate Equities are. We are a publicly traded real estate investment trust, and we have about 4.5 million square feet of properties in Cambridge and about 6 million square feet locally. Our properties are on both coasts in science clusters. So we specialize in science cluster development. You'll see us with technology and science buildings. That's where we spend most of our time and our efforts. We consider this particular site to be a critical site for Kendall Square. We look at the site as right now as being sort of a missing tooth in the urban fabric that you see from one side of the street, and we want to say that we want to be sensitive to what the residential side will look as we go forward. So we are seeking a process for a building that would be 120 feet in height. We don't have completed plans. We have some conceptual ideas which we're going to show you. Saban Morgan will talk about that in just a few minutes. So again, early on the process, we engaged the neighborhood and we went out with one proposal. We're not going to show you that. What we did as a reaction to that is we thought we should pull the building as close to Binney Street as we can and bring the mast to Binney Street, leaving the other portions of the property for other potential uses. Namely, we see that there could be another community benefit of some kind on a portion of that site. We tried, as you can see in this photograph up here, to get the building as far away from the closest residential structure, which is in red, which is some 306 feet away. We also were very mindful of what we did with parking and truck loading. Working with VHB, we in our traffic engineers, we looked at Binney Street and the capacity of Binney Street, and where cars would enter a garage, because we would look for a 2-level garage at this site at 0.8 spaces per 1,000. We also were mindful of where trucks should go and how trucks would interfere, and how trucks would be different than the cars. So we put the loading dock to the north end. We also heard from the neighbors that they would be concerned about noise that would come from the loading dock. So we were proposing an acoustic barrier at that side, which would be substantial. It would be probably a green barrier spread amongst other trees and other green growth in that area that would further be a barrier. So what we have is the mass in front of us in both this drawing as well as what we have here for you to view on the 3D plan that we have here. We draw your attention to the fact that across the street is the Amgen building, which is 120 feet in height plus its penthouse. We're 120 feet plus the penthouse, so the drawings you're seeing have the penthouse of the correct height on it. And you have buildings on the opposite side on the Boston properties, which will range 150 feet and higher in locations. So it's a we feel that 120 feet is appropriate. Again, I'm looking for a process that we can have a discussion about what's appropriate at this location. And this is our start. So we want to bring along with this as part of bearing on the public community benefits. So again, as Jim said earlier, our counselor, he indicated that we looked at the long-standing zoning, not zoning. Planning principles of policy principles that the community development and as well as this planning board have looked at. So the Grand Junction path would be a path that would be extended from where it is today. There is one section that's under construction. It's all that will be under construction this spring. There was one section that's completed between Broadway and Mang already. We would bring 1,800 linear feet of this pathway, the Grand Junction Greenway, to add to this. Now this also would connect off to the right on this photograph. It would connect to where the Millers River recent easements that were granted by the city. So this path has the ability to really be a good, safe location for mobility, for pedestrians, bikes, and other types of non-motorized, non-car traffic could be on this. So no cars, no trucks. So it would be out here. But so this has the potential of getting it going from Boston, Somerville, all the way across to Boston in the future as other sections are brought online. I want to point out to you is that, as you know, the MIT has committed to this section under the VOPI. Again, this is existing, and this is the proposed connection, and that's the Miller Rivers place. Again, another picture of what the massings would look like. The colors are representative of what's there, and what's proposed. The blue is our building. The under construction is the yellow, and we have the fuchsia color that's permitted or proposed in the future. We wanted everyone to be cognizant of what it was that we proposed for this Grand Junction line. This building is something that we acquired. It's a lovely building. It's a matter of public record how much we paid for it. We had to pay to motivate the people to sell. So it was purchased with the idea that there would be a portal for the Grand Junction Greenway. So this would be a significant area. The pathway would be 14 feet wide with 2-foot layings on either side for plantings. We're currently working with the St. Anthony's Church. St. Francis is involved. Church here. We've been talking with them, and we signed a letter with them that allowed us to come forward to discuss the rezoning of this land. So the red pieces there are sort of the new pieces. If you look just to the left where the red ends, that piece there is an existing parcel that was part of 1 Kendall Square. Yeah. So again, the strip that we're buying in the red back in here is 14 feet in width. So the existing conditions that are out there today, the Linden Park is on the left. You're looking down the tracks towards Cambridge Street. So one of the things, again, in our efforts to try to begin to have a discussion, we wanted to, with the community, we wanted to look at other potential images. So here, this chevron-shaped site, which we'll talk about here in a minute, was one that came out of discussion at East Cambridge Planning Team, where we had people that lived in the Linden Park neighborhood wanting to see something with a lower height. To it as it got close to the neighborhood. Later, they wanted to. They said to us, "Well, why don't you just stay at 45 feet?" We provided this plan as a stepping exercise. Again, part of a process of where we can meet, and we know that our work is not complete at this time. So, I want to just re-emphasize what we're providing. We're providing the contribution of land for the Grand Junction path, 1,800 feet, more than 14 feet wide in locations. Additional land at 1 Kendall Square would be part of that pathway. We're looking at the opportunity of having 1,000 new jobs at this location. I think these are very important jobs. They're important because of the science and technology that takes place here that may not take place anywhere else if it's not allowed to be here in Cambridge. The incentive zoning fee of at this point in time would be approximately $6.6 million that would come from this development. There'd be 375 union jobs that would be part of this project that would last about 3 years. And if you just look at 20 years of taxes, we will greatly exceed $88 million in taxes that will come from this over those 20 years. And finally, we are providing an enhanced, safe cycling and pedestrian experience for people to enjoy from the neighborhood and beyond. We think we could have a good impact for the neighborhood.
Just before we have Mr. Sieber Morgan present a little more refinement on the design here, I wanted to share with the board part of the challenge a petitioner faces in a rezoning, particularly a rezoning that involves essentially a single structure. And that is, what is the fine line between a zoning hearing on a zoning petition and a design review? And we recognize that at the moment, these massing diagrams are perhaps the least flattering imagery one can rely upon in trying to contemplate what things might look like. But so in addition to this, and based on our understanding of the expressed desire of the ordinance committee to see more architectural detail, we've asked Mr. Sieber Morgan to show you this evening some basic design concepts he is considering in the early stage discussion about the building. So I just wanted to caution you that what we're about to show you doesn't represent anything close to a full-on design, but an ability to try to put the building in the proper context. And that's why you're seeing this slide for the second time. It was in our earlier presentation, because I think we acknowledge and recognize that the context of these of this site and the surrounding structures is highly relevant in the board and ultimately the council's determination as to what would be the appropriate density in this location. As I said, our underlying principle here is that added density at the Binney Street edge is appropriate, given the commercial nature of that street, and that the development patterns and even the existing zoning recognize that distinction. We're challenged, we know, with what the relationship is in the as we get closer to the residential district. So we've looking in this study and others at what this context is of the surrounding structures, principally the two buildings on Fulkerson Street that you see in the foreground, the garage height of the 1 Kendall Square garage, and then across the street and across the park. So within that context and with those caveats, we've asked Mr. Sieber Morgan to share with you some of his design thinking on how this building might take form. Thank you. Oh, I have one more slide. I'm told. You do. I do, apparently. I can't wait to see what I committed to do. Ah, this is an important slide. Thank you. So this slide acknowledges something that we began to consider. The zoning petition in its current form does not distinguish within the context of what's called the developable site, the land that can be developed, as to where the special permit for additional height and density might go. The more we thought about it, the more we talked to people about it, we recognize that it might be an appropriate amendment to this petition that we would seek or attempt to collaborate with both the Planning Board and the Ordinance Committee, is an acknowledgement that there should be a location within the district where the additional height would not be deemed appropriate. So this petition suggests that height bands or zones could be created. You'll notice this one lines up about 2/3 of the way down the garage on the northern end of Bent Street, but it suggests that this petition, in its current form, because it isn't restricted, would theoretically allow for greater heights and even the 120-foot height to go well into the lot and much closer to the residential district. That was never the intention. That is not Alexandra's intention. We think that would be not good urban planning, not an appropriate context. So we've begun to say, well, you know what, maybe the petition would benefit and the amendment would benefit from placing restrictions in it. So this is a first pass at trying to contemplate what that might be, to create a 120 zone, perhaps an intermediate zone, and then a zone where no additional height would be permitted. So this was the last image I was charged with speaking to, because it's an attempt to say that we recognize that there are ways the petition could be amended to limit the impact of these buildings and also restrict where additional height could go in the overlay district. So thank you for allowing me to explain that.
Thank you. My name is Jay Siebenmorgan. I'm an architect with NBBJ, working with Alexandria Real Estate, and we have just a few images to show you. I'm going to first jump back to this image here. Sure. SIEBENMORGEN. right. To explain, I wanted to explain just some of the massing that you're seeing here and kind of the thinking behind the strategy of the massing, because obviously you see two bar-shaped buildings in this kind of H-shaped plan. So when we're dealing with a life science building, we're also, and we get into specifics of starting to think about the design of such a building, you're thinking about how the building works in a lab planning strategy. So what you're seeing here is two floor plates that are very focused on how you maximize natural light for the inhabitants working there. But also want to just call out the point of the bent massing that you see at the edge of Binney. So it's really important how we think about how we address this urban space or the completion of this space, especially when you think about the fact that this building will now have a very strong frontal presence at the end of Galileo Way, so looking down from Broadway, and we have an image of that to share with you there. The project is also targeting very high energy performance demands, and so that reason that's important also is that we're actually designing it to be 50% more energy efficient than any building in the area, which actually is taking it on target to be one of the most energy efficient lab buildings in the United States. And one of the design issues were so many things are threaded together when you're going for high energy performance. And one of those is that we cannot have a lot of glass in the building because you're trying to mitigate heat gain, and we're also trying to maximize the R value of the wall system of the building. So the more glass you have, the worse the R value is of the facade. This goes down a rabbit hole of technical stuff. So when we look at the building, we're also actually the H plan is a connection between the two plates, and what you're going to see is the frontal facade here on Binney, but you're going to see some pretty some formal expressions on the facade that are actually very linked into vertical social spaces in the building that are meeting spaces, collaboration spaces that maximize the performance of people in the building, and they tie back directly to the central core of the project as well. So internally it's all threaded together. So the early conceptual ideas are that when the building actually bends to address the two grids, the main grid of Binney Street and then how Little Binney bends over, you essentially have a fissure between the pivot point of the mass, and that's where these collaboration spaces are become this kind of celebrated architectural elements on the facade. But also that the base of the building, you can see what's been referred to as Pork Chop Park. This is the design of it was given to us to put into this computer model. So this is the initial designs that we're aware of, but can show you our early interest in how you start tying together the materials from the park into the building, and actually have a very kind of strong public open expression at the base of the building. That then kind of works its way up into the building, so it becomes more iconic quality of how you complete this public space. Just an image zooming into it a bit as well here. So here you see when you get into this, all of these kind of jewels are passively shaded with horizontal fins that also take on the material quality of the base of the building. The grid of the windows is actually based on the lab planning layout. Something that we're very interested in is how you design a kind of different reading of a facade that plays with light and shadow throughout the day. So as the sun moves around the building, the shadows shift because of the way we're looking into this kind of shifted facade panel. And also activating it with some color as well. So on the oblique, the building comes alive in different ways with color. And then this would be down as you're down at the end of at the intersection of Broadway and Galileo Way, looking towards that completed facade. So a lot of things at play right now. Early conceptual thinking. But a lot of thinking of how you complete this space, and you can imagine the Gehry Status Center is behind you in this image. So really important how you kind of complete that urban space in the city. Oh, yes, just to point you out, the Amgen building is here to the left, so that is the 120-foot height as well, so maintaining that kind of urban height edge in the space. These are the three images. Yep. Thank you.
We'd like to thank you, and we look forward to engaging in a process as we go forward. So, again, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go any further, I just want to clear up. So right before the hearing, I received a letter from Mr. Rafferty that, as I understand it, I've only had a moment to glance at it, you are deleting the provision in the initial proposal relating to transfer of development rights of remaining gross floor area.
That's correct. We had actually picked up that language from the existing Echo District as we engaged in discussions with neighbors and others. It was proving to be complicated, not quite understood, and upon reflection, it seemed to be a distraction. So we committed then and are doing so now. I've sent a communication to the city clerk to inform the ordinance committee that we wish to seek an amendment. So I wanted to share with the board, and the amendment is easily achieved by simply striking a single section. So there was some language in there that talked about if that would have allowed for, within 3,000 square feet of the site, the transfer of any development rights that weren't utilized within the district. And as I said, that was proving to complicate our life, and our life is very complicated, I can assure you already. So it was seen that we should just remove that. So I apologize for the late delivery on that, but I appreciate the chair's acknowledging it. We are not asking for that portion of the petition. And
that's the only change, proposed change right now.
Right now, that's correct. So the petition before. And so, I think the amendment process will need to occur through the ordinance committee, but we wanted to bring it to the attention of the planning board.
Okay, thank you. Board members, any questions right now before we go to the public? Hugh?
Right now, there's a diagonal property line between a parcel that we approved a housing project on, but is now owned by Eversource. Are you now negotiating to a land swap with Eversource to create the rectangular parcel you're showing us?
The short answer to that is yes. The longer answer has a lot more to do with how that came about, but yeah, that's probably at the moment, that might be the best one. So you can see the geometry of these two parcels is somewhat unusual. You can see that arcing line to the right. That's the existing property line. All of the proposed development for Alexandria can occur within the land owned by Alexandria. But as we began to explore what might become of the balance of the land and our willingness to consider a conveyance to the city for public purpose, we were asked by members of the city administration, by city councilors that we met with, and others, to make a more regular landform there and to enter into a discussion with Eversource to see about doing a land swap where essentially the portions, just as you head off that image to the left of the arcing property line, which we own, we would swap with Eversource in exchange for getting the portion on the arcing property line between that line and the city street. The result, and we candidly have been sharing drafts of agreements to effectuate this, it would result in a square parcel of approximately 1 acre. So that is, but it is true that the parcel, when it was last in public discussion, involved an application for a 42-unit residential project, which was approved, and then the owner of that project sold the project to Eversource, and we have a limited understanding of Eversource's intentions. We did attend a presentation that they gave to the East Cambridge planning team, but it has become a great source of discussion about what is intended by Eversource in that location. It's another area where we're dealing with a little bit of uncertainty, but we have been asked in negotiations to create a more regular footprint for that parcel.
Just following up on that, I just wanted to be clear. So do I understand that Alexandria does not, at the moment, own the entire strip of land that's proposed for the pathway between Binney and Cambridge, but that you have some agreement with the church to acquire whatever you don't currently own?
Yes, we are in the process of negotiating an acquisition. We are at the moment exchanging offers. There have been offers and counteroffers. We do have a letter agreement providing consent from the church to the filing of the petition on land that they own, and our expectation is that we will be able to reach conclusion on that negotiation. The church, I think it's fair to say they see the benefits to the parish. It's a portion of land that's along the rear of their property that doesn't impact really the usability of their campus. They're well advised, and they're very mindful of the very steep price Alexandria paid the abutting property owner. So I think they're expecting a similar return. So we are going back and forth. We meet on a fairly regular basis, and I think it's only a question of where we end up. But there is a at the moment we don't have the fee ownership. Our understanding is that the way we envision this working is that Alexandria will acquire the land, and as part of its community benefit will follow the model we did at Rogers Street, which is to convey the land, the fee, to the city. And also our expectation is the city will ask of Alexandria to, in addition to acquiring the land, and those costs between the two acquisitions are probably going to be north of $15 million. And then in addition to that, we are probably looking at the need to create would basically provide to the city the funds to develop, construct the path, and also design the path. So the amount of square footage involved for the path is about eight. Okay, so but the church's portion is 32,000 square feet. So the cost of that's the total. But the church, isn't the church close to 1,800? Yeah, so 17,000 of it is the church. Do you have that, Michelle? No. Do you have the image that shows the full Grand Junction? Sorry. You know, with the three components. No. The one that shows the red hashing from that shows what we're getting from the church. That's it. So the three components of the Grand Junction, out at Cambridge Street, you see the approximately 3,600 square foot lot that we've already acquired. What is it, this thing at the top?
The red button.
The red button? Okay, so this is the land on Cambridge Street that was acquired. It is there was a beauty parlor on the ground floor and 2 dwelling units there. That was acquired back in the fall by Alexandria, acquired from a reluctant seller who got a knock at the door one day, the equivalent of a very strong scratch ticket. So we spent a lot of time discussing that. We acquired that. Alexandria, when they acquired One Kendall, already owns the land that runs along the Linden Park neighborhood and into One Kendall. Our understanding is that was likely a railroad spur that went into the site. So this portion of the Grand Junction Path is already owned by Alexandria through its acquisition of One Kendall. And this is the strip we'll be acquiring from the church. We'll need to relocate some parking spaces for them. We're talking about creating a new HVAC system for them because it's in a location which would encroach upon the area where the path would be located. So this is the second portion of the land. It's so there are three components to what it's going to take to bring this from Binney Street to Cambridge Street. Opposite this location is the Peter Vellucci Park. It's a similar size location. When we talked with the city about this plan, they acknowledged that this was a significant hurdle for the Grand Junction. How were they going to get a presence on Cambridge Street? So we began targeting that very early in our proposal. So that was the first acquisition, and once that was in place, we then began a conversation with the church because we weren't sure what the fate of that negotiation might be.
Thank you. Steve, you had a question?
Jim, on the main parcel, the last slide that you showed us showed a portion of it where you were proposing 45 feet and a portion 100 feet and a portion 120. But then you're showing renderings where you are placing all of the height and FAR at one end of it and no development at the other end. So I'm a little bit confused now about what exactly it is that you are proposing.
Well, what this slide is intended to illustrate is 45 feet is the allowed height in a portion of the district, and we're suggesting that the petition could be improved and amended by limiting an area where a increase to 120 feet might be considered appropriate. And that merely shows that. I believe in that image there, that 120, that would probably, what we're showing there probably would accomplish much of what we show in our H footprint. But the middle zone was a notion of, well, what if we had an interim zone? And then what we see beyond the 45 really in our current development thinking would be there'd be no construction at that point. So the underlying zoning would be unchanged. It could not be, the special permit that allowed for increased height and density would not be applicable from a certain point into the district of the lot.
Well, we could have a discussion about how best to do it, but I'm not clear. What exactly is being proposed in the petition now?
Well, as I noted, the petition at the moment simply speaks to the ability for the planning board to grant a special permit up to 120 feet in height. It doesn't limit locations where such a special permit could be permitted. So as we've thought further about it, refined our discussions with neighbors and all that, we believe that the petition could benefit from identifying, so the way it's currently written, and it might be considered a shortcoming of the petition, the way it's currently written, you could theoretically seek a height increase of 120 feet into the district. So we do identify an area in the petition that we call developed land, and then beyond the developed land, we're saying there'd be no bill. So certainly the area involving the Grand Junction and the Cambridge Street parcel are open space areas in the district. But this image is merely intended to say that we think it probably makes sense, and we would probably propose it, and would anticipate anticipate that at some point in the process, either this board or the ordinance committee might deem it appropriate to limit areas where the additional height could be permitted.
Okay, and forgive me for going back and forth just so I can get to a clear understanding. First of all, are you saying that the existing zoning is at 45-foot height?
For commercial development
Okay.
in the industrial A1 district, it's
And,
65 feet for housing.
Okay. Yeah. And your proposal would allow the planning board to grant height up to 120 feet?
Correct.
Any place within this district. And what does your proposal say about FAR?
Would increase the FAR. The current commercial FAR in the industry A1 district is 1.25. We would, the language of the petition asks for an increase by way of special permit to 2.5.
2.5. And I guess one more question about the right-of-way for the potential bike path. Is that or was that owned by the T or MassDOT at some point?
Well, the right-of-way, which consists of the existing rail bed, is owned by, is it CSX or DOT? DOT owns the rail bed, the tracks, and either side of the rail bed throughout the length of the corridor. Where the path is proposed to be would be, you see the rail beds depicted in the gravel. We would go.
Could you use the pointer, please?
So the rail bed is defined by the rails themselves and a 4-foot offset from the rail bed. And then the balance of this land in this particular image, and this is the land running alongside Linden Park, this is currently owned by Alexandria. This is the area where I was describing. Our understanding is there must have been a rail spur at some point in this location going down to the industrial use occurring at the 1 Kendall location. So it's largely been unused. That fence divides the residential neighborhood from the rail, but this is the area here that's proposed and would continue all the way up. At that point, you can see the back wall of the church. We continue that alignment. We pick up 14 feet from the church. We continue, and then in the very distant there is Cambridge Street, and that's where we would open up into the portal. So it abuts the track. It also follows the specs that CDD has got from DOT as to how far the path should be from the center line of the rail. There's also an ability and language in here that could accommodate a setback on the other side of the property where the building's proposed to be, a 40-foot setback in that zone. And the thinking there is someday, perhaps, there could be a light rail vehicle in that 40-foot buffer zone could accommodate a stop for such a transit option. A long, long way in the future.
And maybe you can help me, and maybe this isn't your bailiwick on this, but what is the status and the plans and the destiny for the actual rail right-of-way?
Well, the rail right now is used by the train companies to move trains from North Station to South Station, principally for repair purposes. The repair facility in North Station, the only way trains from South Station, they underneath the turnpike in the Alston area, they come across the Charles River. So the train track itself has limited activity, maybe once, twice in the course of a week. You see a day? Okay. So these people know far better how often. Yeah, that's probably better. So there are freight trains that travel on it, and there are also trains that get swapped from North Station to South Station for repairs.
And again, I understand it's not your bailiwick, but I guess I was operating under some misapprehension that spur was going to be discontinued at some point. Not the case?
No, that's none of the DOT planning for this, and I'm sure the community development can speak to that as well. None of the planning for the Grand Junction along this corridor anticipates the removal of the rail.
There has been discussion about adding a second track and adding some kind of passenger service, but very, it's discussion.
Is there room for a second track?
Yeah. And there's a diagram somewhere in
Right.
things we got that show that.
It's in Mr. Roberts' memo.
Yeah.
And those are DOT planning documents that show a potential light rail.
Board members have any other questions right now? If not, why don't we go to the public? And so we'll start. We have a list of people who have requested to speak, but anyone will have the opportunity to speak whether you've signed up or not. When I call your name, please come forward to the podium and state your name and address for the record. We ask that you speak only for 3 minutes. We have a lighting system. When your time begins, you'll get a green light. About 20 seconds before the end of the 3 minutes, the light will turn yellow, and when it turns red, we ask that you finalize your comments and conclude. As was stated earlier, this is not a design review, so I'd appreciate it if you did not really speak to the design of the building. If you want to talk about height and FAR and density, that's fine, but particulars of a design, which we saw some very preliminary mock-ups of, are not something that this board is considering right now. So Matt Connolly.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Connolly. I live at 13 Cornelius Way, about 280 feet from the Metropolitan Pipe site. I'm also a member of the Linden Park Residents Association. We submitted comments on January 24th, and I don't want to reiterate everything that's in that letter, but I do want to make 2 points. The first is about the impact of the building itself. Anybody who says that this building maintains the urban height edge of the neighborhood, or that it maintains anything at all about the neighborhood, doesn't understand the neighborhood. This building is 3 times higher than what the current zoning allows. It is twice as dense. And as a resident of a building that is 2 stories, 200 feet from it, this is going to have a very significant impact on our neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhood. Alexandria says that this building is going to have 1,000 new jobs, but they've talked nothing at all about how those people are going to get to those jobs. And at a building that large, with the lights that we expect to come from it, there's going to be significant light pollution. None of those things have been addressed. The Alexandria talks about the appropriateness of zoning on this site, and I would submit that the zoning that was submitted in 2001 and 2004, not all that long ago, is appropriate. It says 45 feet for commercial use, and that the FAR will be 1.25. I have heard nothing so far about actually from the building itself why any of that is inappropriate. The only thing I've heard, and which goes to sort of my second point, is the Grand Junction pathway. And I'll tell you, I support the pathway, and I know my other neighbors do too. I think it's fair to say we're disappointed, frustrated by how long it's taking. I think pyramids get built faster than this pathway has been developed. But we also think that this is not the right way to do it. We think the city should be making a commitment to develop the pathway, and they should be using their resources, and they should be doing it. The price that we would pay to get the pathway doesn't have to be this. There are several options that the city has at its disposal, and we're pretty frustrated that Alexandria has tried to tie the pathway, an important benefit for this community and this neighborhood, to a building of this size that is just not in its character. Thank you.
Thank you. Jose Luis Roja.
Good evening. Good evening. Yes, my name is Jose Luis Rojas. I actually live in it's not going to work. Anyway, I live in one of the houses in the red building right there. So I live in 19 Cornelius Way. I'm also part of the association. And I just wanted to, or I can just hold it. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you. Yes, Jose Luis is Jose space Luis. My last name is Rojas, Rojas. You're welcome. Again, 19 Cornelius Way, part of the association. I just wanted to bring in 3 points. When I was reading the memo, I was also very confused as Mr. Cohen as far as what is really being proposed as far as the height. From the first meetings that we've been having with Alexandria had always been talking about that 1 acre plot of land at the back of the property to be given to the city. When we read the memo from the community department, we realized that no, that actually the proposal is to have the whole lot, the whole developable lot to be 120 feet. So we were also very surprised about that because there was a disconnect between what was being told us as a community as what could be part of the potential benefit versus what they were actually requesting. The other point, which is a little bit similar to what Matt was saying, that really the comparison for this building shouldn't be Amgen across the road, Penny. It should really be the buildings along Fulkerson and the garage. The Fulkerson buildings are around 70 feet. The garage is 60 feet at the top, the highest levels, and it steps down all the way to 20 feet by our neighborhood. So when I sit in my garden at the back of my house, I don't see the top of the garage. If this building gets built, I mean, wherever it sits, I mean, basically it's going to be twice as high as that garage is right now. So again, it's something to take into consideration. And then the last point I wanted to make is that, again, when I was reading the memo from the community development team, it says, I quote, "The Bini to Cambridge Street segment of the Grand Junction Greenway may also be one of the most difficult to implement because land along this segment has more varied ownership than other parts of the corridor," unquote. So while this might have been true in the past, right now it only has 2 owners, Alexandria and the church, and it sounds like very soon it will only have 1 owner, Alexandria. So I would ask you to take that into consideration, that this is actually not going to be the hardest part of the track and of the rail path to consider for the cities. If anything, they're making it easier. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles Hines.
Hi, my name is Charles Hines. I live at 207 Charles Street, East Cambridge. I'm here on behalf of the East Cambridge Planning Team as their president. You recently, late this afternoon, got a letter from us. We're a little late with this. What I'd like to do is read part of this into the record and make a few comments. On December 12th, 2018, Alexandria presented a conceptual design for 430,000 square foot building at 325 Binney Street. Now, if you actually look at the building, it's more of a Fulkerson Street project, even though it has a Binney Street address, if you look at the orientation. And a design for a portion of the Grand Junction pathway to the East Cambridge Planning Team. The proposal would almost triple the existing height under the current zoning from 45 feet to 120 feet, which was mentioned here, and doubling the existing FAR of 1.25 to 2.5. The major concern at the December 12th meeting was the height and scale of the building in relation to the other buildings on the north side of Binney Street, as was just previously mentioned. We've got the garage at 65 feet. On the other side, we have buildings 75 feet, 65 feet. So on this side of Binney Street, it's a lot lower than the other side. And that was originally, I think some of the planning was the closer you got to the neighborhood, the lower the heights would go. That's why we have those. Now, they came back December 12th to address the height concern. No, at December 12th, we had height concerns that came back on the 23rd with some other designs, with the chevron design that you've seen here with the different zonings. We didn't think the chevron design with the heights was any better than the first design. We thought it was worse. But after deliberation among the membership and with the residents of Linden Park present, we resolved to oppose the Grand Junction overlay petition as it is for the following reasons. The height and density of the allowed buildings are out of proportion to the buildings on the northern side of Binney Street, Fulkerson Street, where the bulk of the building exists, and the adjacent Linden Park homes. The impact on the 2-story residential homes in Linden Park, including shadow, noise from mechanicals, light from the building, and a change in look and the feel of the area. The Grand Junction path is not considered appropriate mitigation for this project. If Alexandria does gift the path to the city, construction of the path should not be mitigation for this project. and the elephant in the room, the Eversource transfer station. The power transfer station planned for the adjacent parcel is not addressed in the zoning and will have a profound negative effect on the area. ECPT has requested Eversource to find an alternative location for the station, which this is now their plan B. They're trying to find another spot. If a new location is found, Alexandria has expressed interest in purchasing the parcel from the Eversource, and they were at the last meeting. They said it would be a game changer for this project. So this transfer station has a real impact on this. In conclusion, we join with our Linden Park neighbors and respectfully urge the planning board not to support the proposed zoning amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go any further, could Jeff, perhaps you or the proponent, where is the Eversource parcel and what is the proposed transfer?
You know what, why don't you use the pointer over your shoulder?
So I believe this is referring to the site at 135 Fulkerson Street. The
Well,
planning.
could you use that image that was up?
Currently it's sitting in here.
Joe, can you just go back to the image?
Can you go back to the other?
Yeah. Show, the pointer, can you show where the other side?
Okay, the Eversource location is right in this area. It runs it's in an arc right here. We own up behind here, as well as the rest of this land. That land would become part of. I'm not trying to do that. So, again, this area here is would become the Eversource location, but that is to be completed.
And am I correct that the zoning proposal includes what may become the Eversource land in the designation of the
Yes.
development?
The overlay district would include land that currently is in the ownership of Eversource, a portion of it.
Right, and if is there a swap proposed?
Yes.
Right, so you would square off your
Right.
parcel, and they would acquire the balance
so-
that is.
Right, so the proposed red line you see there in the far right would be the new property line between Alexandria's property and the Eversource property. Currently, that line arcs and goes around the back, so Eversource would wind up with an L-shaped parcel. They would come in, that's right, and off to the right. The building in front of it is a telecom building. XO Communications is in that building. That's not owned by Eversource. That's not part of the proposed zoning. But Eversource, the Alexandria land would become a square, and Eversource, could you show Eversource? Eversource would be L-shaped. Up there and then behind, that's the outline. If the land swap were to occur, that would be the land owned by Eversource.
And do you have a image of the proposed development overlay zone?
Right, okay. My co-counsel is pointing out something. So, the one way to think of this is the zoning district, as proposed, contemplates the potential land swap. So if the land swap were to occur, there would be no Eversource land in the district, only land owned by Alexandria. So you can begin to see the back portion there. So we deliberately created the overlay district to reflect a likely future land ownership as opposed to existing conditions, a current land ownership. So that portion that's a square is not currently owned by Alexandria. If the land transfer were to occur, it would be owned by Alexandria, and the effect would be that no land other than Alexandria-owned land would be in that overlay district. So there's no opportunities for additional development on any land owned by Eversource as a result of the adoption of the amendment.
And that square in the back, or part of it, is something you suggested might be somehow become a public benefit to the city.
Correct. So, right. That area there. What am I supposed to be doing? Yeah. I'm
So
talking
the
about-
area in red is the entire proposed overlay district.
Correct.
And what is to the right of that, the L-shaped area that may end up being Eversource's, is outside of the district?
Correct.
Okay.
Currently, the boundary line looks like that.
Right.
So it was with some deliberation that the footprint of this building and the loading and all that was designed to create what amounts to a 1-acre parcel that we're describing as an opportunity for some type of public or municipal use. Candidly, one of the precedents we're considering in doing that, you may recall that in the Binney Street rezoning, the Foundry building was owned by Alexandria. In addition to the creation of the Rogers Park and other public amenities, Alexandria conveyed the Foundry building to the city without any covenants or restrictions about how it would be used, in saying that the city would make the determination as to how it might best be used. And I think that conversation is reaching a conclusion, but we saw this as a similar opportunity, not for Alexandria to say what should go there, but to say there might be an opportunity here that the city may want to consider.
Okay, and just one last clarification. So beyond the proposed overlay district to the north of it, what I call the Eversource possible site, that's all residence C1?
It happens before that. The zoning boundary is probably somewhere right.
Right, but yeah.
It's all residence C1 all the way up there.
Okay.
So you've got some pre-existing non-residential uses here, and then you pick up with residential uses.
I have one question, Sue, if I may. In terms of the schematic building that is being proposed, I think it was mentioned that it was around 440,000 square feet. So does that maximize the FAR at the 2.5 level?
Yeah,
or is-
essentially it would at the
Okay,
2.5.
so there's nothing left over, say if somebody wanted to build housing on that 1 acre site?
Not under this current zoning.
zoning,
But
okay,
if
just as
the
a
city
clarification.
wanted to,
Yes.
I imagine they could.
Okay, so when you say public benefit, you're really thinking of it as more, it's like open space of some sort?
Well, I think there's a lot of expectation around that
Okay.
might be a good use for it. But similarly, we've heard other desires expressed. But
Okay.
I think what we're hearing from a lot of neighbors is it would be a good opportunity for open space. It has a favorable alignment with the park across the street, and talking about how you could expand Charles Street. When the park here, or Hearn Park, we heard from some East Cambridge residents last time, ECPT, that there is a need for additional playing fields and the like, and they would see that being a nice companion piece to the Ahern Park.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Just
Steve?
one follow-up question. Jim, are you proposing some sort of a contract zoning with regard to the Eversource land? I mean, what would be the mechanism? What comes first? You acquire the Eversource land and then there would be a rezoning, or are you expecting there to be a rezoning and then somehow or another we'll rely on you to get the Eversource land later? Or what is the sequencing? And
Well,
that you're proposing?
At the moment, we are in negotiations with Eversource for a land swap. It's kind of a chicken or an egg. Either way, we envision the zoning being able to proceed independent of whether or not the Eversource parcel is acquired. So the Eversource, acquiring the Eversource parcel is not needed for us in terms of the FAR and the program we're trying to build. If we can get that, we think that's where we've created an additional public amenity.
And if perchance the planning board and the city council goes forward with some sort of plan here, and if perchance the concept is that end of the site not be developed, and that all of the FAR be pushed to the other end, as per your vision here, and if the eventual zoning, in fact, provide for no development at that end of the site, I take it that would be consistent with your current state of your hopes and plans here?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go back to the public. Isabel Caceres.
Good evening. I am Isabel Cáceres. Do you need me to spell? Caceres. Isabel. Thank you. 6 Cornelius Way in Cambridge. I've been a resident for 28 years and the last 20 in Linden Park neighborhood. And I am here to express my strong opposition to, as my neighbors are, and to respectfully ask you, the planning board team, you, who assess and will go to make recommendations to city councilors to reject this outrageous proposal by Alexandria. This proposal will be detrimental to the character and physical environment of our community and will create a precedent to be repeated again in this transitional area. We live in a transitional area, and precedents of you, before you maybe, they decided that this is going to be protected with that zoning code, not more than 45 feet, and 1.25 FAR. What they are proposing, they say 120, but if you add the 40 mechanical, it's 160. Our homes are 25 feet, and they have not presented any view from our neighborhood. So keep that in mind, please. We do not oppose Grand Junction pathway project the city envisions. That includes a bike path by our neighborhood. Alexandria has paired this outrageous upzoning proposal to this city project to manipulate your decision. The assessment of these two should be separated. The small strip of land Alexandria is donating is very small proportionally to the Grand Junction pathway project, in exchange for a detrimental impact to residents. I respectfully ask you to keep the current zoning code in this transitional area, no more than 45 feet, and FAR of 1.25, and protect the character and physical environment of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie Sicaccio.
Good evening. My name is Marie Sicaccio. I live at 55 Otis Street in Cambridge.
Yeah, I tried to. Somebody's trying.
My name is Marie Sicaccio. I live at 55 Otis Street in Cambridge. I'm 4th generation Cambridge. I had no intention of coming here because I really thought it was a petition about the Grand Junction. I read the CDD memo, and that's really what it appeared to be. When on a closer reading, I noticed, oh, it's Alexandria again with another upzoning petition. I was the lead opponent years ago, 2008, I believe, in East Cambridge when Alexandria was trying to upzone then, and certainly they were successful at it. But in truth, they get the benefit of the bargain. In reality, the city got the Foundry, but the Foundry is a historic building. It was landmarked. There wasn't much they could do, and it was polluted. If anyone wanted, and I think there was a policy order before City Council, at least discussion about when we're upzoning, we don't know how to cost it out. What is it really worth to the developer or the owner? And I think that if we actually cost it out about what they got in upzoning, it was astronomical in comparison to what we call Pathogen Park and the Foundry. It's polluted, for sure. When I was growing up, where Cornelius Way and Michael Way was just a blight, and the federal government actually declared it a blight and poured in money so that it could be housing. In East Cambridge, Alexandria got to set aside ECAPS. All of a sudden, ECAPS wasn't good enough. And they're doing the same thing here. What's unique about Cambridge is that, as opposed to our neighbors, we allow level 3 labs. And that's why so many labs want to be here. If you go into San Francisco where they do allow, you'll see that within their zoning, they discriminate between lab science and a straight lab. Our zoning is very, very old. When they used lab, the reason why we see lab in the same category as office space is because they anticipated the lab in the doctor's office, the lab in the dentist's office, maybe the lab in the pharmacy. But they never anticipated the labs that we experience today. We allow in Cambridge level 3 labs. There would be no restriction at all on Alexandria. They could have their 120 feet of level 3 labs right down the street from the church, right down the street from Miller's River, and right across the street from Cornelius Way. Now, level 3 labs have airborne pathogens that really for elderly would be fatal and for children would be fatal. They don't just research in the labs. They have to transport through the neighborhood, back and forth. And I think people forget about that. I mean, and also there's going to be a lot of solvents brought in to be used. And I submitted here just a letter of determination.
If you could wrap up, we have received your...
A letter of determination, how San Francisco evaluates. And also, it's a hail and door report that you may find interesting on how they actually construct these and why it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Billy Saccaccio.
Good evening. My name is Betty Lee Saccoccio. I live at 55 Otis Street in Cambridge. And I guess what I want to really say is that I lived through the original Alexandria buildings in our neighborhood of East Cambridge. And what we originally said, and it still remains very true, they were too tall, too toxic, and it is Pathogen Park. I object to the whole way CCD actually is creating this upzoning for Alexandria. The CDD memo is about the Grand Junction. This is really a petition for Alexandria, and it should be seen and heard as that. I support the residents of Linden Street. I also want to say that, you know, there are gatherings. There's a church in the neighborhood. I guess, you know, they've made some arrangement with the church that we don't know about. There is a cultural center. There's the Dante Alighieri that is very close. So these are gatherings of large people. So when something happens, what happens to these people? And plus the fact that people have children on Cornelius Way, on, you know, wherever they are, very, very close to this whole project. The breathing, and I actually know an elderly woman on Cornelius Way who's 87 years old, and she attends my church. So I know that, these people really exist, and they are our neighbors in East Cambridge. And we don't even understand why they're not considered East Cambridge, because they really are. So I would just say, please think very hard how you vote, how you recommend to the city council, because this is not a good way. The Grand Junction, well, the Grand Junction should be heard very separately than with an Alexandria project. Thank you.
Thank you. Yi-Jen Huang. And I apologize in advance to everyone whose names I mangle. I'm sorry, it's hard to read handwriting.
Good evening. My name is Yi-Jen Huang. Thank you for the perfect pronunciation.
Get it right once.
Yi-Jen, Y-I-J-E-N. First name, last name is Huang, H-U-A-N-G. So I'm here to speak my opinions and actually positions to this proposed petition. Many points has been brought up by my neighbors who have spoken before. The 2 points I want to actually bring up is that also actually being brought up just now, that lab building is actually a very unique building type that has actually major impact of the surrounding neighbors. In particular, lab buildings, to my knowledge, runs 24/7. So as a result, unlike housing buildings or residential towers, the light at night can be on or off depending it's living room or bedroom. Usually, a lab will have to continue to be running to pay for the rent, so that the light pollution that is going to create with this 120-foot tall lab tower is quite significant. So just as we were discussing the potential amenity of this gigantic 1 acre park that seems to be being discussed, but please remember, this park won't be next to the Charles River with the nice wind breeze. It's next to the 120-foot lab buildings. So there will be a shadow cast on the park. There will be light pollution. In general, I don't think that would actually be the same type of amenity that everybody might imagine. The second point I want to bring is that I thank the architect who actually bring the model here, that I think actually speak most vividly about how the proposed building is. If it seems that there was some sort of hint saying that the current zoning of 45 foot is may be deemed obsolete in comparison with the current business climate. But if we look at this proposed building in blue, comparing to the those new buildings has been built along the Binney Street further down to the Charles River, you can see it's, the height is actually double the height. And that, I think, just speak very strongly that how out of proportion and outrageous it is. Not to mention, if we look actually from the residential side, I think that height is almost like 4 or 5 times tall. So that's the 2 points I'm making. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Farris.
Good height for me, fortunately. Lee Farris, Leefarris, 269 Norfolk Street. I'm here for the Cambridge Residents Alliance to oppose this proposal. Our concerns are that we strongly support the Grand Junction pathway, but we feel that creating the pathway should not be exchanged for Alexandria being given permission to build this oversized tower near residents' homes, and that the city should find other ways to one of our concerns is the current zoning is intended to provide a transition to the residential neighborhood. And that kind of transition is supported in the new Envision plan, which I was on the housing working group and helped to create. So that plan says, create an intermediate sense of scale between adjacent activities. We also oppose any proposal that is for a taller office building with more density at this site. We think that granting this petition would be a bad precedent for allowing other towers on the border of residential neighborhoods all across the city. And we're also concerned that granting the petition could set a bad precedent for future rezoning of the parking garage on Binney Street. Most importantly, what we would like to see more of in Kendall Square is more housing to accommodate the thousands of jobs being added there. The need for more housing is one of the top Envision Plan priorities. It says, increase overall housing production. This parcel is already zoned to have greater height and density for housing. We would strongly support an appropriate residential building in this location. And of course, a residential building would have smaller and quieter mechanicals and would create less traffic and therefore would impact the residents less. We also think that the Eversource parcel and the unknown plans is a big concern. Specifically, I don't think that an open space given to the city between a 120-foot tall office lab building and an Eversource substation would be a great contribution to, I don't know who would want to hang out there. And so we ask that you vote against granting Alexandria's petition. And then lastly, I have a request to Alexandria, which is in the photo that you showed along the right-of-way, there were a number of trees. Could you please commit to not cutting any of the trees on the property that you own at this time? Thank you.
Thank you. Ilan Levy.
Ilan Levy, ILAN-LEVY, 148 Spring Street. I here have a petition saying against the proposed use of a residential lot by Eversource in East Cambridge that I would like to submit to the planning board and to this file. This is an ongoing petition. This is only the first 250 signatures. And I would like also to speak to a couple of points. First, I would like to speak to the financial aspect. So we know that right now the commercial real estate rents in Kendall Square are around $80 a square foot. For 100,000 square feet, that's equivalent over a 10-year period to $80 million. Times 2.5, that makes 160, that makes $200 million for what the existing zoning allowed, and that's for a 10-year period. That's without counting the actual value of the building that are being put on the lots that are being purchased. So there is 200 million of revenue over 10 years for 200,000 square feet, and then everything that comes on top of that that we're granting. Second thing that I would like to point out is that during this presentation, at no point did Alexandria have a view from the actual neighborhood, which is right there, right? The one thing that we don't talk about, it's just next to a school, exactly like the Eversource power plant that's supposed to be there. And I would like to mention the Eversource power plant again, because you are responsible for it. You, over the last 15 years, have permitted Kendall Square without asking the city to actually properly set up the infrastructure to be able to receive this increase in density. So now we found ourselves at the very last minute having Eversource coming where you had actually permitted 45 residential units, swap the land from under our feet, and because it's a utility, we now have no power to actually mitigate what they're going to do. We are at their mercy. The reason that they're doing that is because they need to supply Kendall Square and the big upzoning that you are permitting. That's the main reason. They came to the East Cambridge planning team, and they told us that with what is in the pipeline currently, they're expecting at least 100 megawatt substation requirement for the lot that they have here. So whatever you're permitting as an increase in density here, and in the other lots that might come about over the next few years, we have permitted Eversource to come here and to infringe on our neighborhoods and come right next to a school where we have our most vulnerable kids, and we have no benefit. There hasn't been one benefit from any of the upzoning that you've given us, or that you've given Alexandria, or any of the other developer in East Cambridge. We've seen increase in traffic, a loss of canopy tree, a high increase in density. What you had told us 9 years ago when Alexandria had their permit that it would be all right, we now can't go and travel on 3rd Street at peak hours. Again, we have loss of tree canopy, and you have kept on permitting and permitting. So I think that it's time to stay. Enough is enough. This time around, this one, don't give it. And on top of that, the pathway, the bicycle Grand Junction has a budget in the city 5-year plan of $10 million. And so the only thing that Alexandria does is compensate and allow that money to go somewhere else. But it's not like we are poor. With $250 million in free cash, we can certainly afford to do better than what we're doing with these kinds of zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Hoffman.
Hello, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street, and it's invigorating to follow the people that I am following. I would take what they've said and tell you that the people who say that this is setting a bad precedent are really being kind, because this is more of the precedent that has already been set. Now, I got involved in civic issues right after ECAPS. So what I've gotten to see in my years of paying attention to things is how ECAPS, which residents gave a year and a half of their lives to, hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, has pretty much been tossed in the trash ever since it was passed into law. It's one of the principles of zoning, probably not just in Cambridge, but certainly in Cambridge, which is that residents get one shot, and then developers get to come in and say that what the residents did to make their lives better is not making the developers' lives better, and so you really need to give them more. That's what we have seen over and over and over in Kendall Square. And as Elon said, what that's brought us is what Eversource says is 98% of the grid is now called on the heaviest days. We can't just keep growing without thinking about what it's doing to us. And you have a letter from Marianne D'Onofrio where she talks about the walling off of our neighborhood. The wall is getting closer and closer and closer. So at what point do you just say, let's sell East Cambridge to the developers because we are in the way? We're getting there. And I don't think that any of you want that to be your legacy. You are the planning board. I have seen you do planning. I've seen you care. So please do it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Pamela Van Dart.
We'll just hold this. Pamela Van Dort at 13 Cornelius Way. V-A-N space D-O-R-T. Yep. I reiterate all the points that my neighbors have made previously, and also just want to add to that this really is the gateway to our neighborhood. I live in Linden Park, like many of the folks who have spoken here, but really this is the transitional gateway between the main commercial Kendall Square and residential Wellington, Harrington, and East Cambridge, not just Linden Park, which admittedly is more affected. The other neighborhoods are immediately affected. Kennedy Longfellow School is just 2 blocks away. As you can see here, there are going to be many families, many children walking through here on a daily basis. I think, as Ethan pointed out, this visual I think is really telling. If you look at it, the blue tower here is much taller than anything around it and is just completely out of character with the surrounding buildings. We're not saying we're anti-development, but we're pro-appropriate development, and we think that the current zoning of 45 feet is much more appropriate to this than anything higher than that, given that there are residences that are only 1 to 3 stories that border this on one whole entire side. Additionally, while Alexandria likes to point to Amgen, that's not really indicative of what is immediately next to this building. That's the parking garage, which at its height, other than the elevator, is actually 64 feet at the highest platform. And similarly, across Fulkerson, it's much lower than 120 feet. I believe it's closer to 80, and I'm not sure if that includes mechanicals, but either way, it's substantially lower, and that also is not immediately next to residences. So I encourage you to consider that as you evaluate this petition. Additionally, I don't think anyone yet has emphasized the traffic implications of this fully. Fulkerson is a one-way street south, and my understanding is, at least in the renderings we've seen so far, not to latch onto those too strongly, that would be primarily where the traffic would be coming from. That would be the entrance to the underground parking and potentially the loading dock as well. We've heard numbers quoted of approximately 1,000 people that would be coming to and from this building. Presumably a large segment of those people would be coming by car. I'm not sure how many of you have driven down Cardinal Maderos near Cambridge Street between 4 and 7 p.m., but it is already backed up all the way past Cornelius, basically to the One Kendall Square complex already. And adding additional traffic that would have to go on Cardinal Maderos because Fulkerson is one way south is just going to make a huge nightmare for the neighborhood beyond just even, again, our streets. Further, specifically the language in the petition, while there have been other plans put forward, they're not distinguishing between where they propose the building now and otherwise, so it's asking for 120 throughout the whole zone, which includes C1 zoning for residential. And we oppose changing C1 residential to industrial in a city that already has too little housing. Additionally, I just want to mention that we have an online petition going where 124 of our neighbors just in the last week have agreed that they oppose this tower and that they support keeping the current zoning for this site. I also have 2 submissions from other neighbors in Linden Park that were not able to make it today that they would like me to submit for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Yes, please.
Abra Berkowitz at, wow, I almost said my old address. Let's see, 632 Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge. Yep. So I want to speak about the proposal because I keep kind of running back to Envision and thinking of the suggested priorities. And we really are in this transitional kind of zone where we need to consider development that is transitional. And as everyone's saying, 120 feet isn't transitional. You know, I mean, it's doubling the density. That's not transitional. And even when I lived in the port, I would get traffic backed up for like easily an hour and a half coming from Kendall Square. Like just car after car after car, and then they would dash through the lights. I bike. I've almost been hit so many times by cars who are so frustrated with all the traffic that they're light hopping. So, I mean, the magnitude of the traffic is very real. Also, as a member of the Residents Alliance, we care a lot about housing. We also see a link between kind of all of the new jobs that are being built and the lack of housing to house these people. It's not so simple, but it is supply and demand fundamentally. And so to permit a project that will just bring more jobs and not bring more housing seems pretty counterintuitive. Again, particularly because we support housing. It's one of our number one, at least expressed priorities, even if it's not kind of implemented, even if it's not acted upon. So I really hope you reconsider issuing the special permit. I think that we could maybe consider something more flexible or more permissive if we're talking housing, which already you could build to 65 feet. So why the heck not? Why not do that? So I do hope you consider this very seriously and consider the impacts on the whole city, really. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Lino Becerra, Lino. Last name is Becerra, and my address is 6 Cornelius Way. So I'm a part of the Linden Park Residents Association, and I'm here to also express what all my fellow neighbors from the Linden Park, as well from our sister organization, the CPT, has expressed already, that this proposal is too large for us. We had several meetings that you can see there on the screen, and in all of them, the majority, if not the absolute majority, of the neighbors present expressed the total rejection to Alexandra's petition. And it's because it's too large, it's inappropriate, and if we take the liberty to remove it, the tower, from this plot, you can clearly see that everything around that area is nicely sized. 65, 72 at the front, 85 here and 92 here. This is 120 plus 40 plus 25 is 145. Theirs is going to be like 160. The Amgen building is behind their own building. The Chop Park is farther away. The Amgen building is retracted from any other park. It's not adjacent to any neighborhood. This is not appropriate. Furthermore, I want also to point to you that the FAR that Alexandra's petition is actually more than 2.5, because in that calculation of the FAR, they include all the land they are donating to the city. It's part of the calculation for the piece of land they're going to develop. I actually also wanted to say that this building will project an enormous shadow. A lot of neighbors have invested a lot of money in getting their solar panels around there. And you will know very well that once you have shadows on your panels, they go to zilch. They do not produce electricity. So all this investment, I understand the architect has shown us and tell us about beautiful new methodologies to make this building highly efficient. But everybody that has invested in solar panel is going to go down the drain, because with those shadows, there will be no more solar power generated. So I respectfully request to you that this proposal receive a negative recommendation to the city ordinance and the city council. And actually, I want to finish by thanking you for all your work. I know you do all this voluntarily. It takes a lot of time. You have to take the heat of all the neighbors. I understand that, and I appreciate what you're doing for us.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? All right, none appearing, then we will go to questions and comments by the board, but why don't we take a 10-minute break right now? And we'll come back and go to the board. Okay. So board members, who would like to start? Hugh, would you like to begin?
Usually I like to start because I have questions or I have ideas. And I have a list of questions here, of which now 4 of them got checked off in the discussions we had about the church property and the land swap and the suitability of a 120-foot height facing the school and the Linden Park. The only observation of this sort of detailed nature, there's a group of maybe 6 or 8 mature trees that are on the 14-foot wide former railroad right-of-way very close to Binney Street. And so if there was a 14-foot wide multi-use path there, all those trees would get cut. So if one's negotiating in detail and one's serious about trying to preserve trees, maybe a somewhat wider right-of-way is needed. That's also, you've got to look at the garage, the entry to the garage, the trees, the path, to see if it's how to do that. I don't think that's really what brought all these people out here tonight. Somebody said that ECAPS had been thrown away. I don't think it's been thrown away, but I don't think some of the provisions of ECAPS have been followed, and particularly along the density on Binney Street. That the 5-story building on Binney Street that was converted to housing, the concrete building, has become more the standard that got spread along the street than a 45-foot high commercial building. And frankly, I don't have a lot of trouble with that. I think 20 or 30 feet difference in height of a building that's several blocks away isn't critical. And I have to say that I don't particularly mind a building that's 120 feet on Binney Street. Yes, it's not ECAPS. It's taller than the other buildings there. But I could stretch, if that was, if that allowed the path to go forward more rapidly, that's the kind of a trade-off I would look at. And I could probably feel that the back wing, if it were, half that tall, or might represent a transition in scale that would, when studied, might hold up. The question of, well, is there just been too much development in East Cambridge is it's a recognition that there has been a great deal of development in Kendall Square, and that's happened because basically because of the brains that are at MIT and to some extent are willing to come down from Harvard Square, and commercial companies wanting to tap into that knowledge base and those people and do their work that is important work for the country and the planet. I don't live there. I live 3/4 of a mile west. So I see the cars that are lined up for blocks and blocks on Broadway in the morning and the afternoon. So I understand that phenomenon, but it's, and I don't try to move through the city at that time of day, except on my bicycle, where I can go considerably more effectively than people in cars. I guess, what's the process? I came here tonight and I hadn't seen half the pages in this book that we were shown. It sort of annoys me that I spent a lot of time thinking about this with only half the facts in place. But I thought, you need to look at conceptual designs to evaluate the impact. So the fact that the designs were here tonight helped me evaluate what was really being talked about. How do you determine how much is too much? And I look at that and I say, well, it looks like too much to me, but what's the process you go through to really make that determination, taking in the points of view that we've heard tonight, which I would characterize as saying it's way too much, and why don't we just stick with the rules where they are as they were negotiated in ECAPS, because those rules permit a lot of development. So it's very hard to me to know how to advise the council. Fortunately, I've got wise and experienced colleagues here who will be able to tell me how to answer that. They're wise people who've come to us tonight. Is that the only answer? Which is sort of the just say no solution. I think the path is very important. It's something that 100 years from now, longer, people are going to say, it's a wonderful thing. The city is not very good at actually making these things happen quickly. I think we are reluctant to spend our wealth. We want to spend other people's money. Why isn't there a bridge across the railroad tracks at Alewife that's been identified for, 3 or 4 planning studies? Why is this taking so long to do this? So I don't really have answers. I sort of have this jumble of thoughts. So maybe I'll just give my colleagues a chance to put their thoughts on the table.
Sure. So my first reaction when I read the petition was no to 120 feet. I was more focused on the height, obviously, for whatever reason, than the FAR. But And so I thought, well, if it's no across the site, you know, is there anything that would seem reasonable to me? And I thought, okay, well, maybe if it was 120 along Binney and it stepped down, maybe I could, that might work. Again, as Hugh said, you kind of have to see how it models. So lo and behold, tonight we have a model and some drawings. And while I think the drawing looked very impressive from the Binney Street side, as was pointed out, we don't really have any sense of what it looks like from the neighborhood side, but just based on that model alone, it looks like it's just too big. You know, again, I think the view this way, yeah, it kind of fits in with everything else around it, but coming the other way, it's just, there is, to me, there's no transition. It's just you go from low to high. So I guess in terms of the height, I certainly wouldn't recommend the petition as it's currently drafted. I do think there might be some additional value in taking a further look at studies and seeing what that stepping down would look like, and you know, whether the 120 is really needed. I mean, maybe there's somewhere in between the garage height and 120 that wouldn't seem as you know, and again, stepping down as you go further back, that wouldn't seem as overwhelming to the neighborhood. But I think as currently crafted, it's just not an appropriate transition. And I do worry. I mean, I think transitional zones are very important, and you know, we've looked at this as one before and put zoning in place that was deemed to be an appropriate transition. So I worry about adjusting it at this point if the sole reason is the Grand Junction. I mean, I understand the Grand Junction pathway is important, and I would certainly like to have it happen sooner rather than later, but I think we need to know more about the trade-offs and what's a reasonable trade-off. I mean, perhaps some additional FAR is okay. Maybe more of a mix of uses. Maybe we could get some housing in there. Anyway, I think, you know, I wouldn't say no to everything. I wouldn't say absolutely it has to stay exactly as the zoning is today, but I don't think this petition has it right either. And unfortunately, I don't know what the answer is.
Steve?
Well, I would preface my comments with my conclusion. And my conclusion is that this isn't ready for prime time yet. That I think it's going to take more than this discussion with the planning board to get to the point of making a recommendation to the city council. I think we would like to get to the point where we can make a recommendation, but I think it's going to take more work, more discussion amongst ourselves, with the applicants, more input from staff before we're going to get there. So now that I've stated my conclusion, I'm looking at the plan and I'm listening to the neighbors, and I'm trying to focus on the issues. Of course, this is all about the fact that it's on a transitional site. You know, if this were deeper in the district, this would be a much easier task for us to tackle. But it's the transition. It's not enough for us to look at the geometry of a site in the abstract and help the applicant come up with a good design. I mean, we have to be balancing that against the input and the interests and the concerns that are expressed by the neighbors. And boy, there isn't a real good science that helps us difficult conflict and a difference of perspective. So I'm looking at it, and I'm trying to figure out two different thoughts. First of all, I mean, the plan already has taken the approach of trying to push the mass away from the residential neighborhood. And yet we heard significant objections, so have they already found the ideal balance? Two other possibilities would be, to push the mass and the height further away from the residential end. We've got a design which makes a larger footprint. Should the footprint be more compact and pull it further away from the residential neighborhood? But then you still have the height issue, and we heard a lot about height. And so maybe it's exactly the opposite. The applicants have tried to leave the land closest to the residential neighborhood undeveloped. But we've heard some skepticism about the value and utility of that particular parcel, and maybe the right approach actually would be a larger footprint and build on that portion of the land as well, but at much lower height, and maybe at low height at that end, and step up a bit more as you move away from the neighborhood. So perhaps you start at the 45-foot, which is the zoning, the existing zoning at the neighborhood end, and you step up, and perhaps you get as high as, who knows, you get 80 feet at the other end. I assume from the applicant's perspective, it's all about FAR. It's the economics are primarily about how much square footage he can build there, and I assume the applicant is relatively flexible about the actual configuration. I'm sure they might have preferences one way or the other, but ultimately it's just how many square feet can you get onto the site. So I think that might take some more conversation with the neighbors to figure out exactly where the concerns are, and if we were in fact to extend the building onto what is currently shown as the undeveloped portion of the site, and we're able to significantly reduce the height of the proposal, would that address some or many of the concerns? I don't have any preconceived notions on that. Whatever my personal preferences are really irrelevant. This isn't about what I like. This is about finding the right balance of interests between the commercial interests of the applicant and the residential interests of the neighbors. So I guess I'd like to see some of those other options explored. I'd like to hear more from neighbors, whether some variation of the ideas that I've just expressed would help to address and mitigate their concerns. Ultimately, it is about square footage, and I imagine that we could, if we had a good reason and rationale, that we could press the applicant to reduce the square footage somewhat. But I don't want to do things just for spite or to get a pound of flesh or anything. I'm certainly willing to push the applicant to make changes and to compromise. But again, only if we think that we're really accomplishing something, that we're ending up with a better design, and along the way addressing concerns expressed by the neighbors. Anyway, I think this is just the beginning of the conversation, not the end.
Lou?
Well, I guess I'm going to have to agree with everything everyone said. I do agree the FAR is probably the right mix. I don't like the massing. I think it should be transition down to the 45-foot height. I agree that the 120-foot, 150-foot, whichever it turns into on Binney Street, isn't a big problem. I don't know what we do about the traffic. I don't think it's their fault. I don't think it's anyone, the traffic's going to be there. I think it's time for the Grand Junction. I believe that'll help with the traffic. If we get another light rail that goes up that area at some point in the history, we have to think long term. Possibly that'll be a good suggestion. And I'd like to know what my neighbors, because I live very close to here, and it's not East Cambridge because we're on the other side of the tracks. But I can see sacrificing. A park or an open space across from an adjacent open space makes not a lot of sense. I think by putting the buildings lower grade and will help you with the light pollution. Maybe you'll be able to shield these buildings a little bit from the neighborhood, make some more open space around these buildings and make it more park-like. I think that's actually the direction you should go.
Well, I think there's actually, at least two real issues here that probably need to be separated. One is the planning issue of what's the appropriate height and size for something on this location, and the other issue is wanting the Grand Junction and how does that occur, and then they get tied together in the cost-benefit analysis. So I think from a planning perspective, from someone who's usually arguing for height, that what is in the zoning is probably pretty correct. The 45 and higher if it's residential, but maybe that 45 is not the right height. Maybe it's 65, maybe it's 70, but I think there is a distinct difference between the north and the south sides of Binney Street, and that it really is a transitional neighborhood, and that putting 120 feet there is just not the right place to put it. It is a big lot. It's a very large lot, and it's actually separated from Linden Park by the railroad tracks, by a lot of other things, and that, maybe it doesn't have to be 1.25 FAR. Maybe something larger makes more sense to get the square footage that's needed. So I think from a planning point of view, having a tower right there, even though it's across the street from some others that are that height, but I think Binney Street does effectively separate the neighborhoods. And so then the second thing is the Grand Junction. And obviously there's a cost to getting the Grand Junction. And I don't know what that is, but the city could buy it, could buy the land, could negotiate for the land, or the city could take the land by eminent domain, and there's a cost involved. You have to pay damages. And so it would be really interesting if somebody analyzed it, what could be done by the owner, Alexandria, on their land now, what's its worth under current zoning, and what diminution in value would there be if the city bought or took the Grand Junction, that space for the Grand Junction. And so I don't think we have that information. And, from my point of view, the proposed, in my cost-benefit analysis, the less than an acre, the 30-some thousand square foot strip of land, is not worth the tremendous value increase that the upzoning would give, And not just to the developer, but there's also the detriments to the neighborhood and to the city at large. Now, today was the first time I really heard about the possibility of throwing in that other lot. But still, it seems to me, in a cost-benefit analysis, the city is not getting all that much for the potential harm to the neighborhood. Yes, the city gets the things that were listed in the presentation of increased jobs, increased income, et cetera, but obviously there's going to be an industrial building, a commercial building of some point, as some type, on that lot, and the city is going to get an enormous amount of money out of it one way or the other. May not be as much, but it will get a fair amount of money. And so I think, the trade-off doesn't seem worth it to me. And I'm curious whether, if there was not this linkage, whether any of us would be even thinking about, gee, we should upzone this property. So,
Could I comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
On that, Ted. I think that the Grand Junction land is a nice sweetener, but it's not the main course. I think whatever we review and whatever we decide on for the building on the parcel here, it has to be justified on its own right. We either think it's a good plan or we don't think it's a good plan. And I think if we think it's a good plan, as part of the deal here, we will work in the Grand Junction. But the Grand Junction and the possibility or opportunity to get the Grand Junction should really not be a significant factor in our review of the building. The proposal has to stand on its own.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's initially a planning decision, and whether there is rationale to change the zoning, and any upzoning will be a benefit to the developer, but there may be other benefits, to the city and to the neighborhood that justify the upzoning.
But whatever benefits there are, we're not going to approve a building that we don't think is a good building. So we have to be persuaded that this building is a good building, that it works, that it finds the right balance between the interests of the city and the applicant and of the neighbors in particular. It may be one of those deals where by finding the right balance, nobody is perfectly happy, but everybody gets something. But I just feel that that's got to stand on its own, and the Grand Junction is just going to be a sweetener to close the deal.
Any other comments? So I guess it would seem to me the sense of the board is that we not recommend to City Council that they adopt the proposed zoning amendment in its current form, and that there be continuing thought about it by the proponent, and further conversation with the neighborhood, and that as someone said, it's not ready for prime time, and that there be more thought put into it, and more discussion, and with probably a proposal that is not nearly as high, and perhaps with some greater FAR than the current 1.25. But it's up to the developer, the owner of the land, to pursue what they're interested in, rather than us trying to design it for them.
Also to figure out what exactly is the crux of the objection and concerns from the neighbors, and as best as I can tell, it's been primarily height. You know, not FAR, but height.
Hiram?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one suggestion because the board had asked the proponent, I don't know if you've changed your mind about this, to model certain different variations. And if you make a recommendation now to the, I just want to ask the question, do you want the proponent to bring those back to the planning board? Or would you like that to not come back to the planning board? Because you don't have to make a recommendation to the council today. You could just ask the proponent to bring back that work before you decide on what your recommendation ought to be.
I think
my preference would be that we get into a process with the applicant and not even bother going to the city council.
I'd have to agree. Some more work on it and see if it makes a better proposal.
I think we can get to a place where we, may very well all be on the same page. We know that this is a creative, committed, flexible proponent, and we're pretty creative and flexible ourselves. I think we can get someplace here, and I think we ought to press ourselves to do so.
I really don't care about what process, what procedure is followed. I was thinking a negative recommendation now, and perhaps that the ordinance committee and the city council would then leave it on the table so that it does not be considered run into a repetitive petition issue, but that to let the developer rethink what they wanted to do. But if we wanted to just not make a recommendation now and
my suggestion, I don't really have an opinion on either way, but this is they haven't yet had their hearing at the ordinance committee, so their clock hasn't started. They have 90 days to go, and they could be doing work and bringing it back to the board and to the ordinance committee during that time.
If that's continue this, correct?
If that's what the board wants to do, sure. Yes. So we would continue this hearing, and at some point it might have to be re-advertised for a different type of proposal.
One of the problems of being in this chair for 30 years is I can't remember if Dennis is currently one of the chairs of the ordinance committee. I think it's you and Craig this cycle. And so I think our discussion will be taken back to the ordinance committee. It's been heard by a chair. And
you don't think they've all been watching on TV tonight?
Oh, of course.
I could just add that the conversation tonight has been very helpful. And for what it's worth, I heard comments that I feel very similar attitudes toward the same subject. A few of us have met with neighbors, a few of us have met with the development team. We understand both sides, and I think, quite frankly, you grabbed it all. And the thing so we very much intend, like we did with Volpe, to set up some informal group, perhaps once again with community development, to negotiate. The thing that I almost got up and raised is this whole impact of when you have a 120-foot tall building, you have 35 feet more on top of it. When it's a 60-foot building, I can't speak exactly, but it's probably 22 feet or something like that. Joe's doing this, so maybe 25, maybe 26. But that added dimension is huge. And I think architecturally, the architect did some nice things with it on the front elevation, trying to make it part of the architecture. It's the back portion, that wing, that I think maybe concerns all of us. And So this couldn't have been better prepped for our meeting tomorrow. And it will not be decided in one meeting. This will keep going. So I think we entirely agree, and I appreciate it.
Okay, so
I'm an architect, and I also have the advantage of having worked 40 years ago on one of the very few stepped buildings in the city of Cambridge, which is the Harvard Undergraduate Science Center, that steps up floor by floor from 2 stories up to 8 stories. So if they're playing with ideas, one idea I would like to see played with is actually the idea that you step up from the 3 stories at the back without any mechanicals on it, or virtually none, to, pretty much filling up the site, leaving front setbacks and the setback along there, maybe creating an atrium in the middle of the building so that there's natural light that gets seen. The wings, the width of the wings that are shown in this model are such that you could put one running lengthwise and have a space for light to come down in the middle. So it would be a very compact building. You'd have a problem of how do you deal with the long walls and try to disguise what it really is, but that might be the most efficient way to get the maximum amount of floor area, and it might allow you to achieve the kind of height regimes that you want on Binney Street and that you want on the back. I tend to think from a second floor bedroom in Linden neighborhood, it's going to be a big building. And it may be the best big building you can get. I think that's what we're trying to find out is what's the best big building, and if there's one that's not good enough, well, that's the answer.
But some of the ideas that you were expressed are consistent with what I was thinking as well. Use that other end of the site as well.
Yes, use the site.
Start low, 3 stories, 45 feet, or whatever it is, and build up. It could be a ziggurat. It could be, something that might somehow square the circle here.
I'd like to raise one other issue that we didn't speak about at all today, but there was a part of the proposed zoning relates to project review and would short circuit the process, and we follow PUDs, but I don't understand why one particular building should be treated differently from all other buildings in the city.
Wasn't clear to me whether the intent was to short-circuit the review or structure the review in a particular way, and maybe the proponent could respond to that.
Thank you. Just briefly, it was certainly not the case. Okay. It was certainly not the case to circumvent it, but I think some of our thinking was a PUD type schematic approval and then design review. Right. I think that's another area where we can refine that language. We are not looking for disparate treatment from other buildings, and I think the laws of uniformity around zoning might suggest we'd be best served to stick with the other thing. I want to put a plug in for the board. It seems like you're not going to make a recommendation, because I would be concerned that jurisdictionally it would be out of your hands at that point. If you make a recommendation, we think that there's opportunities to improve here. We obviously would like to see the continued involvement of this board. So
I think the sense of the board is to continue this hearing.
I got that sense as well.
And let you come back if you wish with some revised proposal.
We would look forward to that. We're listening very carefully, so we're hearing consistent things. We've heard it in other settings. I suspect we'll hear something similar tomorrow, and that will leave us an opportunity to, go back to the drawing board on many of the concepts we have here. But thank you.
So then, is it the sense of the board?
There was some other language in there about FAR under overhangs and roofs and so forth. You want to explain that?
Yeah. That's just, if we're going to all this effort to write zoning, there are a few interpretations in zoning. And as we start to look at designs where what is considered a covered porch at ISD gets included in GFA. So if you have a projecting bay 3 stories out, the area below the projecting bay, even in cases when that area is terra firma, it's just ground, whether it's pervious or impervious, there's an interpretation that said, okay, that gets included in your GFA calculation. And it drives architects crazy. It drives everyone crazy because how do we calculate? So if you have any type of projection, it's not just the area within the projection, but the treatment of the land below the projection. That's an attempt to try to eliminate the back and forth that takes place on that.
But even if you build over this projection, say an overhanging cantilever, and you build
Right.
above it.
Right. So I think the type of some of the images you saw in that rendering on facing the park, certain of the canopies and the projecting things, there are interpretations that would say portions of area that are not by anyone's thinking part of the building get included in the GFA calculation. We were hoping to kind of remove some of the guesswork that takes place. It's an interpretation question that comes long after the projects leave here and we go to the building department to get a building permit. All of a sudden, the numbers get crunched and we're told, well, that's GFA. And we say, well, that's...
Well, there was also some reference to atria and lobbies, internal lobbies.
Yes, that's true.
I suggest that whatever language you propose should not be different from whatever other buildings are subject to by ISD.
Or make a more general proposal to fix the language.
Well,
well, that's a good thought, right.
Yeah.
Okay. A point well taken. We'll certainly analyze that. Thank you.
Okay. So it's a sense then we will then continue this hearing. Okay. Great. Well, thank you all for coming. We have one more matter to address with regard to a Board of Zoning Appeal matter. You're all welcome to stay if you'd like. If not, we'd ask that you could take your conversations outside so that we could finish up our work as quickly as possible. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, more. Thank you. I want more paper. I don't have enough paper in my life.
Okay, Liza, do you want to tell us where we are?
So on the Board of Zoning Appeal cases to be heard on January 31st, the 34th, the case for 840 Memorial Drive is the Riverside Technology Building. There's a proposal for new antennas, and we actually have someone here from the applicant's side. And this is a new installation. So we've been looking at a lot of replacements. This is a brand-new one. Are people familiar with the location? I might be able, okay, so we know where we are. Okay, so. I will say that staff reviewed it, and Susanna suggested that there might be a way to consolidate some of the installation, that the view from the residential neighborhood, Putnam Avenue, Blackstone Street, was probably the most prominent one.
U2, is that it? Four, okay.
Photo 4?
New on this building, but are they replacing antennas anywhere else in the neighborhood? You know, like they gave up a location to put them here?
Is this on? Yeah, there we go. My name is Alex Merstein. I'm here representing AT&T and Sunderland Communications. And what we're presenting before you today is actually a project that was previously approved. The special permit has expired. And now we're back before you to essentially reinstate said permit. The installation has in fact slightly changed, and it has been masked less than it was before. The shelter used to be, for example, a 12 by 28 shelter, and it is now an 8 by 8 shelter, I believe. We've also decreased the number of flues. It used to be 12 flues at the initial filing, and it's now down to 6. Furthermore, I should add that SHPO has approved this design already, and the State Historic Preservation Officer has reviewed and approved the design as presented. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them, whether it be about specific view sheds or anything else.
Susanna, do you want to give us your comments?
There's actually quite a lot of equipment and penthouses and things up there, so the addition of the flues kind of seems to disappear, or it's not as prominent as it could be, and we appreciate the use of the flues and not the antennas being visible. It was just that one view where we thought there could be an improvement if it could be better screened. And I guess we would want to be, there could be more antennas coming in the future if this is a new site. So that's something the board should be aware of as well.
Also, as part of this discussion, Corinne, who couldn't be here this evening, said that she had concerns about this particular installation, and she's voiced these things to me before in the past, that the reviews are usually based on aesthetics, and she would like to ask if you would consider supporting a request for two city resources, the Law Department and the Public Health Department, to provide information to the BZA and the Planning Board for future reference. In this case, the petitioner requests a special permit to install 12 new cell antenna on the roof of what seems to be a 5 or 6 story building located adjacent to residences and within 0.2 miles of 808 Memorial Drive. If the special permit were granted, this would increase the total number of antenna on this roof from 12 to 24. I would ask the Law Department to provide additional information on what issues are within the city's regulatory purview. Must the BZA accept these 12 new antennas being installed, or could the BZA deny this special permit if they found it to be detrimental to the public good? And I would also ask the Cambridge Public Health Department has any information to share with the BZA as they evaluate the placement of cell antenna and towers in relation to residences, especially when the frequencies emitted will be horizontal to units where people live. Electromagnetic waves travel horizontally and levels are relevant within 1 kilometer. Residents of a tall building like 808 would be exposed to the RF from these antennae and have near continuous cumulative exposure. I would like to ask if the Public Health Department has any concerns about this type of exposure for infants, elders, or other populations. I would also like to ask if they have advice about what distance or height is optimal near residences and how many antennae are optimal before there would be a health concern. Whatever information is learned from the Law Department and the Public Health Department could be included in a comment that gets passed to the BZA for its review of this and other such cases. So I just wanted to make sure you heard that.
Well, I have certainly no objection to staff asking the Law Department and Public Health Department to address those questions. I assume the Law Department probably has in the past when the law was changed, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, about the ability, what the city can and can't do. And I know the health issues have been debated ad infinitum, but, you know, I have no objection to it. I don't know if board members have any objection to passing it on to those departments and seeing if they're willing to respond.
The BZA? The Board of Zoning Appeal case is this Thursday, the 31st.
I don't know whether they'll be able to respond that quickly for the hearing, but it might be interesting information to help us going forward. I mean, I really haven't studied that much about the health effects of these sorts of things, so it would be informative if not useful.
Seems to me if you're going to ask for the information, then you need to ask the BZA to not make a decision until the information is received.
Mm.
And out of respect for our colleague who perhaps knows more about it than the rest of us, we should probably support her request.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Mm-hmm.
If I may point out that some of the health effects study elements were already incorporated into the application, both the original one in 2013, 2014, as well as this one, which you can find at tab, I believe it's tab 8.
I also think that some of the questions that Corinne asked are sort of a general nature for installations.
Right.
Yes,
Others, for non-commissioners,
But I think some of those questions are interesting questions. They're important questions, but they aren't specific to this application. Sure, it would make sense perhaps for us to get some input in general about such applications, and probably wouldn't be a terrible thing for us to have some general guidelines also, so that we don't do each of these things as a total standalone one-off. But I'm not sure how many of those questions were specific to this particular application, and should necessarily hold up this particular application.
Well, she notes there that it's a block or so away from 808 Memorial
808,
Drive.
right. It's the proximity, I guess, of the
Yeah.
the building.
I think it's probably more relevant in this case than it would be in some of the others, because in others we're just replacing, and so it's kind of, we've had a longstanding tradition of that going on. It's less frequently that we have new installations. And I assume over time there is some cumulative effect from all of these. In my non-scientific way, I would guess that. But anyway.
A controversial premise, the impact of microwaves on human habitation. So it would be interesting to see how our staff or our law department would respond to that question.
Yeah.
So if the planning board wants to forward the email requesting the information to the law department, there has to be a motion from the board to do so.
So move.
Second.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Well, perhaps we ought to, if we have comments unrelated to the health and legal issues, more on purely aesthetic issues or design issues that we want to make, perhaps we should forward them on too, and let BZA decide what they're going to do.
So is there an opportunity to, for example, in view 4, move some of the antennas back from the edge of the roof so as they are less prominent and still achieving their function? This question before, and there's a technical answer of whether the coverage allows them to be without deteriorating. And of course, none of us actually use cell phones ourselves. It's the present building with it is unsightly, yet somehow it doesn't stand out. Maybe it's because you never stop when you're on Memorial Drive, even if you're bicycling. But if you're living across the street, you are stopped. You do see them. So I think that's a question I would suggest the BZA ask, whether it's possible to move the alpha sector antennas inboard somewhat so that their impact might be similar to the beta sector antennas in terms of the appearance of the building.
We can certainly ask radio frequency team to see if they would support the coverage that they're looking for to fill the deficiencies currently presented that require the site, and it is currently set back 10 feet. So I will hope that they don't ask us to make it taller, which would, of course, negate the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. But we can certainly ask, and we will do that. I'll do that tonight in advance of the BZA hearing on Thursday.
Are the proposed alpha sector antennas and canisters the same height as the beta sector ones?
Yes, all of them are the same height.
All of them are the same height, so the fact that the beta ones look lower is because they're further back?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? No? Well, thank you very much. And if you could address that, so you can address it to the BZA, and Liza, I guess if you can forward that information on to the law.
Are we adjourned? Because I have one more thing after the adjournment.
Yes, we are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Okay.